This is not some pop gun that's going to be fired. One nuclear weapon fire is bound to cause escalation.
There is no clarity as such because the Russians and the Chinese and the Americans have all been conducting subcritical tests since 1992, 1996. So all of this seems to point to possibility that what Trump basically wants to do is to sort of raise the temperature on nukes to get the Chinese onto the arms control negotiating table, which China has been resisting for a number of years because China is in a phase of expansion of its nuclear arsenal. So the coming together of AI and nuclear weapons is a sort of the next level of danger that one must think about, one must worry about.
Actually, if he's going to do an explosive test, then it actually permits us to modernize, together with bring about certain changes in our arsenal. So the whole thing is so fickle and on a trigger, on a hair trigger, it can be set off by anybody.
There is not only the deterrence value of nuclear weapons, there is also this taboo. There is also this tradition of non-use that we can actually rely on in terms of nuclear weapons.
Has Trump's nuclear bombshell triggered a new nuclear arms race? Is the US military behind Trump's outsourcing nuclear submarines, or has Trump arrived at this all by himself, believing in leveraging US technology in return for investments to boost the domestic industry? Didn't work its magic in the New York mayoral poll. Zohran Mamdani, a man who proudly calls himself an immigrant and a Muslim, has made Manhattan his own. But this is a political earthquake in the making. Most polls are now showing an alarming drop in Trump's popularity. Will it impact the midterms? Will it impact other actions he's taken at home and abroad? At home, there's the government shutdown and the US Supreme Court set to rule on whether he can unilaterally impose tariffs on countries. 3 lower courts have already ruled tariffs, the centerpiece of his economic agenda, as illegal. India in particular is facing crippling tariffs and is in wait-and-watch mode. Set against the internal is the international, the subject of today's debate. Has Donald Trump just triggered a nuclear arms race? Hello everyone, I'm Neena Gopal. Welcome to Global Express, our weekly deep dive into the big story of the week. Do click on Global Express on the new Indian Express website and share. So our big question today, has US President Donald Trump set off a nuclear storm? Offering propulsion technology to South Korea that will allow the South Korean Navy to build a nuclear-powered submarine. So far, this is a technology that has only been shared with the UK. It's now being offered to the Australians. But China is the one that triggered this US nuclear taboo in Asia. It must be said, it doesn't quite gel with the counter-narrative of US-China duopoly that everyone's talking about, the new G2. But Trump also has to look at Russia. This is Russia, China, and a Pakistan confluence of interests, all of which could signal trouble for India. An India which signed the US-India nuclear deal, an India that was told by the US Congress, as spelled out in the Henry Hyde Act, that it must not conduct any more nuclear tests. What did we agree to in the new 1-3 agreement? And what are India's nuclear capabilities? Talking to us today are 3 experts on the United States and its nuclear policy that impacts India. Vice Admiral Vijay Shankar served as the Commander-in-Chief of the Strategic Forces Command of the Indian Armed Forces and the Commander-in-Chief of the Andaman Nicobar Islands and Flag Officer commanding Western Fleet. He saw active service during the 1971 war, the IPKF operations in Sri Lanka, and Kargil. He's a Track 2 veteran, which is taking part in the India-US nuclear deal and India-Sino-Pac trilateral, working with a number of think tanks on nuclear non-proliferation and CBMs. Welcome, Vice Admiral Vijay Shankar. I'm happy to have Bharath Gopalaswamy back on our show. Formerly Deputy Director Asia at the Atlantic Council, he was a senior research scholar at Cornell University's Peace Studies program and a researcher in CIPRI's Arms Control and Non-Proliferation program. He has an inside line on the US nuclear capability and why Trump wants to start detonating nuclear warheads again. Welcome, Mr. Gopalaswamy. Also on the show is S Raghotham, a strategic analyst, commentator on international affairs, defense and nuclear and space issues, with a particular interest on the Indo-US nuclear deal, which he tracked very closely. Welcome, Mr. Raghotham. My first question is to you, Admiral. Russia has openly claimed that it is going to turn the Arctic into its new area where it will test nuclear weapons. It's developed a new torpedo drone and a nuclear powered cruise missile. This was the first bit of nuclear saber rattling by any country. It's now saying it will start testing nuclear weapons, if Trump follows the same path. But Trump is the one who actually set off the nuclear bombshell, don't you think? He announced his decision to resume nuclear testing for the first time in 33 years and justified by saying that other countries are doing it. He said Russia's testing, China's testing, they don't talk about it. He said Pakistan and China were conducting deep tests. Tell me what we can go with this. Where do we go with this?
One thing certainly that Trump's declaration has done is to put nuclear planners and policymakers in a tizzy worldwide. The dilemma is really something like this. If they are to respond, would they be mistaking something which is not really there? Would they be tilting at windmills and crying out wolf when there doesn't actually exist any threat of explosive nuclear testing, which is really the issue? The second part of the dilemma, which is more important, is any nation willing to play around with its nuclear security? After all, the impact of such a statement is widespread. What it could do is change, one, the entire nuclear arms controls structures that have been built so painstakingly through the Cold War. The entire nuclear theology that exists so far would have broken down. Countries may actually find themselves free to build a deterrent, which some countries have already remarked on. Remember, at the end of last year, Chancellor Merz, just before taking office, had made a statement. And what he said was that if the USA cannot guarantee Germany's security, then maybe they'd have to look at a separate deterrent along with an Anglo-French collaboration. Countries like Japan, which through the Cold War and thereafter have considered themselves fairly safe under an extended nuclear deterrence, would now feel a little shaky. That would they need to create a build-up, a deterrence of their own? Now, these are some of the immediate impacts that may occur if what Trump has said is to be interpreted as nuclear explosive testing. Now, what was it that Trump actually stated in his 30th October statement? And now I quote.
Yeah. What did he say?
He said, because of other countries' testing programs, I have instructed the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis, unquote. Now, this can be interpreted in
equal basis.
This can be interpreted in many ways. But the most, I being a military man, while we give our hopes optimism, we always prepare for a worst case situation. And the worst case situation is something like this, that he is talking about explosive testing of his nuclear weapons. Now, if that happens, it almost opens the door. The entire as I mentioned, disarmament structures, the NPT, the idea that there is a moratorium on testing, all goes overboard. Now, that to me is perhaps one of the riskiest things, because what is happening? In 1991, when the Soviet Union broke up and Soviet Union was just plain old Russia, what happened? The doomsday clock had set the danger at 17 minutes before midnight, 17 or 14, but it certainly ran into minutes. Over the last 3 decades or more, that particular period has been reduced to 89 seconds. And come January 20th, we're going to find that that clock is going to be pushed further forward. Dangers of a nuclear situation where either through mistakes, poor interpretation of nuclear signaling, does go into a nuclear conflagration, you've really got a problem now. Is that conflagration
Yes. So,
going to be excited or activated unintentionally? This is not some pop gun that's going to be fired. One nuclear weapon fire is bound to cause escalation if the victim is a nuclear armed country. And that escalation will not stop so easily, because now it becomes something existential. And that really underscores the difference between conventional wars and the nuclear war. In a conventional war, we are concerned with capabilities. In a nuclear situation, it is the intentions that worry you. And if the intentions is what
that's right.
worries you, those can only be made clear if, from my point of view, that no country uses a weapon first, a nuclear weapon first. Thus far, practically all countries have declared a moratorium on testing, including North Korea. Even North Korea
Including
has
North Korea.
stopped testing as of 2018. Most other countries stopped almost 30 years ago. Russia stopped in 1990. The USA stopped in 1992. France and China stopped in 1996. We stopped in 1998. We're talking about explosives testing, and so did Pakistan. And we come to North Korea, who stops in 2018.
So, if I can bring you in, that's a very interesting aspect. You're saying that an explosive test is what we need to be worried about. The fact that anyone other than North Korea, if Russia does it in the Arctic, it could set off a whole knock-on effect. Is that what you're saying, Admiral?
No, no, no. Nobody has tested any weapon in an explosive nuclear test. All tests are either of the vector or the physical package without activating an explosion. Now, these thus far have been the rule. In fact, America has set aside a fair amount of monies for the next 10 decades for modernizing. But this modernizing is basically laboratory testing or testing of
I
the
see.
vector without a nuclear head. That is what I'm saying.
Okay. Bharath Gopalaswamy, if I could bring you in, the US has conducted something like 1,000 nuclear tests apparently, and it maintains something like 5,000 nuclear warheads, second only to Russia, and far more than the 600 plus that China is believed to have. Why should the US even think about returning to testing? Because it's tested, as the Admiral and all of over 1,000 warheads. He's got enough data to design new warheads. What does Trump want? Does he want to build more nuclear warheads? Or is it just bluster?
Good morning. I think the admiral has put it beautifully. In terms of tests, the data, the U.S. is by far has one of the most advanced and sophisticated nuclear arsenal and everything. And what does Trump want? I really cannot speak for Trump. So it is, and I would not make the risk of speaking for him. Um, uh, it is, somewhere you catch him on an Air Force One going from place A to place B. Primarily, this is all political frustration. His campaign day promise number one was he wanted to end the war in Ukraine. Day number one, come into office, the war ends, and I am going to get the Nobel Prize next year or this year. You know, that hasn't ended. He's slowly coming into the in rightful way. He's slowly coming into this slow realization that Putin has played him all along, and that is starting because he canceled the summit that was going to be held in Hungary, a summit or a meeting that
In Budapest.
in Budapest that he was going to have with having Putin. Then he said it's a waste of time. They're not serious. So he invested a lot of political capital, and then obviously with the Russian intentions here, the war is we don't. There is not an immediate end to the war. So, and he did say, besides whatever he said about the nuclear weapons, he said there is another part that he added. He said we should not be talking about nukes. We should be talking about sitting down and having how to end the war. People are dying, and that's always been on his mind. So there is that part, that particular part, which he means it, and he means that particular aspect that he wants to end the war. I think he for from his first time, this is the first time that you hear him diverging from Putin. I think that is where you have to place his statements in those contexts. Why the U.S. Wants to, it's been a political issue even since the Clinton days. The U.S. has signed on to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, but not necessarily ratified it. They are the biggest. The moment
That's
the U.S.
right.
And in India, I don't think you have the signing and the ratification in India. I'm not a lawyer, but I suspect the signing and ratification are not very different for the Indian Parliament. The moment you sign it, it also gets ratified. However, in the United States, it has to be ratified um, by the Senate, and the way things are now, you probably will never. I'm not the one to use the word never, but it's a distant dream for you to get the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty ratified. So until you have that open-endedness, you will have politicians here and there who will loosely flirt on the sidelines of should we nuclear test it, should we go, and it's dangerous, but that's how politics is.
Raghutam, if I could bring you in, the as both these gentlemen have said, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty has not been has only been signed, but not ratified by China, Russia, and the U.S. I mean, why? And is if Trump actually does start testing, we don't know whether he will or not. Will it bring this de facto moratorium to an end? I mean, would he risk that? Because then he opens the doors to Russia and China to test, and China, which apparently has got very advanced AI, could catch up with the US, is what analysts are saying. And then what happens to its puppet and its ally Pakistan?
Thanks, Meena. And thanks for having me on the show again. Yeah, I mean that's the danger here, because this is, as Bharat said, politicians will talk. Yeah, even in India, they talk about no first use, let's go to first use kind of thing. So when something like this comes from the president of the United States, it's strategic miscommunication, missignaling of a very high order, very dangerous and disastrous order, because there is a level of vagueness in what he said. I don't think he meant explosive testing, and I base this on the fact that he mentioned on an equal basis in his statement. So although it appears like he's talking about explosive testing, It doesn't seem to be that. So there is no clarity as such, because the Russians and the Chinese and the Americans have all been conducting subcritical tests since 1992, 1996, right? That is, as the Admiral explained, everything, the non-explosive package, you leave out the plutonium pit, but you test out everything else. Those are called subcritical tests. And then there are what are called supercritical tests as well. You actually go right up to initiating chain reaction and then back off from that. So that is something that Russians and Chinese are supposed to have been doing so far in terms of supercritical testing. And that might be what Trump might be, alluding to, because he says we are not doing this and they are doing this sort of thing. So even if that be the case, as the Admiral said, the whole non-proliferation and arms control regime that the US itself has led, the
Sorry.
nuclear order. The nuclear order that we exist in was basically what the US decided, right? And he is tearing it down. And that's going to be extremely dangerous, not just for countries like India, which live in a rough neighborhood, even for the United States and its global leadership.
Okay. Admiral, if I could bring you back in, could you tell us something about India's nuclear weapon power capability? Because, we, in the old days, I mean, some 20 years ago, there was talk about how we only had a few dozen low yield bombs, and that doesn't have a missile that can even reach Beijing or the United States, that we don't have a nuclear deterrence capability, even after 6 nuclear tests. What is the actual, story, the real story? How much of that is still true?
I'm afraid I'm a bit dated on information of this nature, and besides, nobody is going to share it with me. But I can tell you this, that since 1998, you have developed a credible deterrent. Now, by credible, it means that if one were to fire a nuclear weapon of whatever yield, since we've adopted a no first use policy, you can expect a retaliation which will come at the time of our choosing and with the yield that we decide on targets, which will invariably be value targets. And we're pretty sure against our adversaries that capability exists. A lot of effort has gone into creating that capability. After all, when you look at it, if you're sending unmanned vehicles to the moon, you're sending a Mars Voyager, these are things that don't come without the necessary technologies. And those technologies are very much there within our deterrent. Our arsenal holds that kind of technology. As far as the numbers are concerned, of course, this is a matter of great interest, and therefore I will quote from open sources.
Mm-hmm.
Open sources say we have 180 warheads. Now, those 180 warheads can vary right from a simple fission weapon to a thermonuclear weapon. The 5, not 4 or not 6, the 5 tests that were conducted during Pokhran 2 not only looked at the fission weapons but also thermonuclear capability together with fractional yield weapons. The last 2 were fractional. One must not forget it. So that gives us a capability, albeit one may say not tested as much as the Americans, which is over 1,000 tests, or the Russians, which is over 700 tests, or the Chinese, which is 47 tests. But certain
That's right.
simulations have been done, and you can rest assured that the capability exists. Nobody need doubt it. And you can also
It's upside down.
rest assured that the whole business cannot be
Upside down.
sparked off by a nuclear attack by us. We are sworn to a
Upside
no
down.
first use capability. And therefore, our capabilities target just one effect, and that is a massive retaliation to anyone who tries to hit us with a nuclear weapon, who hits us with a nuclear weapon.
If I can bring you in, Mr. Gopal Swami, can we talk about China? Because there is this Sino-Pakistan nuclear relationship that sustains Pakistan's nuclear weapons program, and they're deploying, as the admiral and all of you have said, long-range missiles apparently, such as the DF-31. So, and during Operation Sindoor, I think India was pretty rattled by the fact that China was the one that was calling the shots in many ways with the Pakistan military. So, could you spell out to us whether that poses a threat, whether China poses a threat to India in real terms?
To be honest, I think Admiral is best positioned to answer this question. I would not be able to comment on this.
Admiral, would you like to come in on that? Because you've written about it quite extensively also.
Uh, Let me put it this way: China was providing intelligence support, and that was real time intelligence. China had provided them certain weapons whose ranges we did not seem fully aware of. The air to air missiles that had been provided by the Chinese, I forget the designation, HP 15 or whatever it was slated at a range of 150 kilometers, whereas it was a little more. Yes, these are facts. But to say that they actually went on to open a second front somewhere else is not quite true. While there are some arguments that say that, hold it, it's not a second front, it's all one front. But to be fair to the Chinese, they stood to lose a dash sight more by getting involved in this conflict. Yes, they gained by the fact that quite a lot of their weaponry was tried out. And there is nothing that can prove munitions and weapons and surveillance gear better than combat trials in real combat. And that we've seen
Yes,
that
yes,
most of
that's
their
true.
surveillance gear was hit. Most of their earlier air to air missiles, which they had supplied, were, well, they didn't hit their targets. And thirdly, the drones that they may have provided between them and the Turks were not very effective. It was like a situation in Diwali. They were picked out by very they were picked out by very old weaponry. I mean, about 3 generation old weaponry, like the L-70s. These are, they're not rapid firing, but with certain gyroscopic aiming devices, they're ideal for these slow moving vehicles in the air. And they took them out as they came.
But Admiral, on the actual nuclear weaponry that Pakistan possesses, is that a threat to India? Would that pose a threat to India in the current circumstances? Do they have any? I mean, you've talked about Islamic radicals calling the shots the Pakistan military. You've talked about them holding the have military trigger. So does that extend to the nuclear establishment? Is what I would like to know.
One of the biggest dangers with this business of war fighting, I'd like to take recourse to a statement made by Nietzsche, and he said, "Madness in an individual is a rarity, but madness amongst nations, groups, and epochs is the rule. Nietzsche. Now,
Oh,
unquote.
beautifully put.
Now, the fact is that when you get a mass of people deciding on any such, should we say, lethal issue like the use of nuclear weapons, there is a certain madness built into the whole system. Unfortunately, in a country where a lot of the nation's policies are Maulvi driven, you run this risk. Now, the only way to contend with this risk is to have a credible force that says you may fire one, we may lose people, but you're going to lose the country. Choice is really now with them, and that is the should we say the basis foundation of no first use. Remember what I said about
Yes.
nuclear weapons and nuclear war fighting. It's a matter of intentions, what I intend to do with this weapon. They're not weapons of war fighting. The danger is if you mistake the nuclear war fighting with and integrate it also with conventional war fighting. Then you really lost the trick. After all, it was Clausewitz who said that war is politics by other means. A continuation of
Yes,
politics
that's true.
is war. And therefore, there is a definite aim. The aim cannot be annihilation. The aim cannot be destruction to an extent where you lose all. I can't think of any even irrational uh, jihadi who believes that I'm willing to lose my country. After all, the response to Operation Sindoor, the worst hit, okay, quite a lot of their Air Force assets were hit, but the worst hit were the terrorists.
That's true. That's true. It was their madrasas and their hideouts which were hit.
Their, network centers that were hit, like Bawalpur, Murid K, these are all their centers. And then if you start, and then some of your hits that went into Noor Khan Air Base. Noor Khan Air Base is a stone's
That's
throw
true.
from GHQ.
True. True. So, Bharat Gopalswamy, could you? No, not at all. Not at all. Bharat, can you talk to us about what you see as the nuclear nightmare in the subcontinent? Is there one? Because I mean, ever since India became a nuclear power and Pakistan became a nuclear power, there's actually never been even a hint that either of these countries would use a nuclear weapon. It actually put a hold on it, right?
I mean, yeah, I from where the admiral left off. Um, Look, the nightmare in Pakistan, again, it's not today. The Pakistani army is professional. The strategic plans division is a professional division. Um, but the jihadi elements, the jihadi elements, the nightmare scenario obviously is the jihadi elements or the army, which is being increasingly as a state, which has corrupted the state. That effectively. But having said that, um, the, I believe it was Clinton who said South Asia is the most dangerous place in Earth, right? But having said that, actually, if you could make the argument that South Asia has handled the nuclear weapons with much more responsibility than the other side of the world has handled it. Even things like the we have this Hague Code of Conduct, okay, which is a code of conduct in which countries are supposed to notify each other 72 hours in advance of a ballistic missile test and stuff. The US and Russia at one point also had this joint data exchange cooperation agreement and stuff where they would inform each other in advance. In my research, I found out that sometimes many of these countries, as well as the US and Russia, also strictly do not adhere themselves to these guidelines. Whereas I believe in the subcontinent, you have a DGMO hotline, and these missile tests are notified, the other party is notified. There is a very robust procedure, and I think during the worst of times as well, still both countries notify each other. So that structure has actually worked very well in the subcontinent. I'm quoting Kishore Mahbubani here. The Europeans, I think, after 1945, said Europe's past is Asia's future. All the wars were fought in Europe. Now all the wars will be in Asia, and there will be no wars again in Europe. Look at where the trigger of the recent war was, drawing the Europeans back into the fold with the Russians. So I think relatively, South Asia, for all its rough and robust neighborhood, one can argue that people have been a little more responsible and probably have drawn the right lessons from European and American history.
That's very interesting. Yeah. Raghotham, would you like to comment on the fact that the US president set off this nuclear storm by offering to share, nuclear propulsion technology with South Korea? That would allow South Korean Navy to build one nuclear power submarine in return for this, of course, $1 million investment. But this technology has only been shared with the UK so far, right? I mean, and now it's being offered to Australia. So is the US breaking the nuclear taboo in Asia? As as Bharat very rightly put it, this is where it could be the new, where the new wars could be.
Yeah, so there is a clue, despite the vagueness of Trump's statement, there is a clue in all of this as to what is on Trump's mind. That's a conjecture I think we can make. Because if you remember, I'll come to the Seoul thing. But before that, when Trump said he wants the Bagram Air Base back for the US Air Force, the one thing he mentioned along with that is to say that air base is just 100 miles away from where the Chinese test their nuclear weapons, the
Yes,
Loknath
he said that.
site,
Yeah.
right? And there has been a lot of activity that has been detected at Loknath site since about 2020 or so, and the Americans expect that the Chinese are preparing to test. That is one. The other is, of course, what you mentioned. Trump has given a green signal to South Korea to build a nuclear-powered submarine, not a nuclear weapons-carrying submarine, but a nuclear-powered submarine. There is already the AUKUS arrangement with Australia, so which means very cleverly within the bounds of non-proliferation, the US is allowing its allies in the around China, right, to sort of take some of the load of containing China, right? Because the US sees itself unable to do it on its own. China's manufacturing capability is such, especially even in the naval domain, that the US won't be able to contain it on its own. So it is allowing all these partners also to sort of build their own capabilities in the region. So all of this seems to point to possibility that what Trump basically wants to do is to sort of raise the temperature on nukes to get the Chinese onto the arms control negotiating table. So far, it has been only US and Russia that have been participating in the arms control agreements. China has refused to do so. The New START treaty expires in February 2026. So they need something else to replace that. Otherwise, the limits on the US and Russian nuclear weapons also, is taken off. And so Russia can go ahead and arm, hundreds of missiles. The US can do the same thing. So if the arms control thing is to be preserved, the US has been saying for some years now that it wants China also on the table because China is rapidly building up its nuclear arsenal. Right? And by 2035,
it has the world's largest navy at the moment. And I think in the Yellow Sea, it is actually the predominant force.
Sure, you can build a number of ships because you have the capability to build. But what exactly does it mean, and how far-reaching, how blue water is this navy is a question mark still. I think the admiral should be able to answer that better than any other person. But I think in terms of submarines, China has done a humongous job. They are able to build submarines at a pace that the US and Europe and Japan and Korea are not able to match combined, right? So you need more of these nuclear-powered submarines in the region.
Raghutham,
In
are
the
these
region,
nuclear
yeah.
powered submarines or diesel powered submarines?
No. Trump specifically mentioned nuclear-powered submarines. The ask from the South Korean president was for nuclear-powered submarines, right? Because those can stay underwater and are less detectable than the diesel-powered ones, longer range, right? So there is a possibility that this whole thing was basically to get China onto the arms control table, which China has been resisting for a number of years because China is in a phase of expansion of its nuclear arsenal. So it's quite possible that is the method, but one would still wonder if that is the way to get China onto the table. One of the things that the Joe Biden administration did was to get China to agree to a dialogue on the use of AI in nuclear weapons management, nuclear operations management. I think that was supposed to get off the ground, but I don't know what the situation will be now. So the coming together of AI and nuclear weapons is a sort of the next level of danger that one must think about, one must worry about. As the admiral said, the clock, doomsday clock, is at 89 seconds. It will go rapidly down if AI starts to manage. It's basically the idea of giving control over nuclear weapons to AI decision making sort of arrangement. That could be quite dangerous, and Joe Biden was trying to get a dialogue going on that. Now, can Trump get the Chinese to agree to a dialogue on arms control? Can three people sit at the table, arms control table, is a question. He has thrown a curveball at the world. It's for the Chinese to react at this point of time, I think. But I don't hope. I don't have much hope for the Chinese to come onto the arms control table, basically because they are in an expansionary phase. They want to achieve parity and then talk as equals to the other two. I think that's the Chinese mindset.
That's
So
good. That's interesting.
yeah.
Admiral, if we could come back to India, how should we in India be viewing Trump's announcement? I mean, is it an opportunity for India to, validate its new designs, get more data, because he is basically saying that, India's very vulnerable in many ways, and that we don't have any public discussion on India's nuclear capability right now, do we?
What is the impact of Trump's statement on the Indian nuclear posture? Actually, if he's going to do an explosive test, then it actually permits us to modernize together with, bring about certain changes in our arsenal, which is something that they never wanted us to ever get to. And therefore, that is the opportunity that's being provided. But there's a big if here. If Trump's declaration was about explosive testing, that is the precondition. The second issue is vulnerabilities. Actually, I don't think there are very few countries that are not vulnerable to a nuclear attack. Unfortunately, that's the truth of the matter. No surveillance system is infallible. The fact that the two major incidents that I'd like to put my finger on during the 1962 Cuban crisis, they were defused by a captain at sea. The use of a nuclear torpedo was belayed, was withheld on the orders of a captain in a submarine. Similarly, there was another gentleman called Stanislav Petrov.
Wow.
When they had designed their first surveillance systems to monitor what on earth is going on the North Dakota missile fields, they were getting moment to moment information. And just one fine night, in fact, these things normally happen in the middle watch, so that is after 12 o'clock, in this control center of Moscow, he gets a major alarm to say the Americans have launched ICBMs. And these ICBMs were followed by another report of several
Wow.
others coming. Now, this gentleman called Stanislav Petrov was a lieutenant colonel. His job was mechanical. He was supposed to tell the Kremlin where the decision would be made, be taken out of everybody's hands. He just pressed a button and retaliate. That would have been the situation. But this gentleman knew that glitches had been forthcoming. And at any rate, if an attack was to materialize, it would have been massive. But this didn't seem like a massive attack, and it was on his own volition that he delayed reporting it. He said there's a technical glitch, and sure enough, there was a technical glitch. That is the hair trigger situation that existed during the Cold War, after which, between Reagan and Bush and Gorbachev, they decided that, hey,
Gorbachev.
hold it. You cannot have such situations because you cannot have an unintentional war. You cannot have a war which is unwinnable. Which, any normal
Mm.
guy, rational guy would have told you this. Sitting on 60,000 warheads, a combined number of warheads that could blow the world up several times and keep it dead for several centuries, is not something that can be played around with. And just to emphasize that, in 1984 85, Ronald Reagan was due to go on air, national broadcast, and he was asked by the
Uh-huh.
person controlling it that please test the mic. So he thought he was testing the mic, and he said, "I hereby declare Russia as a outlawed or an illegal state. We commence bombing in 5 minutes." Moscow went on red alert. Time magazine had a wonderful cartoon on this.
My gosh.
Wonderful cartoon on it. The response was Brezhnev says, "We have launched our nuclear missiles, and this is no joke." You know, so the whole thing is so fickle and on a trigger, on a hair trigger. It can be set off by anybody,
Yeah,
particularly
absolutely.
if there's an element of irrationality in that leadership. Irrationality itself has been often used, Musharraf used it, to convince you that, listen, you get any further, here's my red line, I'm going to go nuke you. But that irrationality is also factored in. He's not going to begin with a bolt from the blue attack. So, when we are talking about the situation in Pakistan and the fact of our nuclear relationship, yes, it is not exactly a very happy relationship, but as the gentleman before me had mentioned, there are lines of communication, there are thresholds that have been put in. In our case, it's no first use. That doesn't mean you don't prepare for the worst.
Yes,
You do prepare
absolutely.
for the worst, but it is no first use. And are you really willing to lose where the benefit of this exchange is not going to come to you? Simple as that. Are you really going to risk that? And I think
Yeah.
between India and Pakistan, there is that
Mm.
element
That
of
that's very interesting.
there is that element which forms a firewall. Yes, please.
That is true. That is very true. Bharat Gopalaswamy, what is this whole buzz about Project 2025? Do you know what that is? Because it's in this day and age. If what is Trump's working with? I mean, you can come in as well, Raghutam, on this subject because I'm running out of time. So
No, I
if you
mean,
can make concluding remarks, that will be
that's
good, both of you.
yeah. I'm just going to make some concluding remarks. The whole 2025 is a separate conversation, but I just want to say a few things that are unsaid here.
Yeah.
Today you are working. This is look the American system as it was. All these things that have happened. Put it in the context when the machinery, the bureaucracy was well oiled. The federal government jobs were sought after jobs, and people in the federal government functioned. And there was a Bureau of Arms Control in the State Department, the NSC, the White House had another arms control senior director for arms control in these kinds of positions. Today, unfortunately, the federal government it's the longest shutdown that we can think of as of today. I'm traveling somewhere. I get a message alert from American Airlines saying that it's starting to disrupt flight schedules. The air traffic controllers have not been paid. A bunch of these officers, the military officers, yes, there has been random payments here and there. So for 40, 45 days, many of these people have not been paid. Okay. People who are sitting in those current jobs are actually worried for their jobs. Think about, yes, yes, I've asked the federal government to go and test these weapons. Some of them were let go. The first Doge, one of the Doge elements was at the Department of Energy, where many of these people were fired. Then they were reinstated, and this is the status of the federal government today. And all these policies, the arms control. You and I are discussing about these things. I'm not sure how many of these interagency meetings or these things take place, and there is even if it's a top down driven approach, there is a whole gamut of discussions between these generals and so on. And and then there is a whole epistemic community. It's laid out in the public. Some of these debates are invited, and then it processes to the president to ultimately make a policy on some of these things. Today, the Congress almost virtually sometimes rubber stamps um, whatever the president says. I think we've lost her. Yeah. So you're working. This is what you're working with today. So, and this is the status. I'm not sure how much of how the 89 seconds will further. I think will move a little more to the unwanted side. The basic point is this was all in the federal bureaucracy. Today, it's the bureaucracy is shaken. There is, and the fragility is much more than what um, than it ever existed. So that's where that's where things are. So
Yeah, that's very well put. But also, Raghutam, do you think that the US is opening the doors to countries like Seoul and like Japan and Australia, to take on the onus, of keeping China in check? I mean, is the US vacating that space and going to let Australia and South Korea do the fighting? I mean, what do you think? Because he it's where this whole thing was set off. Maybe this argument doesn't hold true at all, and maybe the reverse is true, that he wants to up the atom, so to speak, in Asia, but alongside the US.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the strategy. I mean, the US won't vacate the space. They are being pushed back in the Western Pacific. That is a bit of an issue because the Chinese are advancing in that sense. They are able to sort of throw their missiles further than at any point of time. So Guam is in their sights. And so the US is feeling that it's pushed further back, in the Western Pacific. But this has always been the strategy since the end of the Cold War. If you remember something called Draft Defense Policy Guide 1992, it was basically to get regional actors to sort of do a lot of burden sharing so to contain any regional power that looks like it's becoming a peer competitor of the US. Today it's China, so yeah, the US wants a lot of burden sharing to happen in that region, and these countries are available. Japan is still not on board with that. That certainly is part of the strategy. I mean, nuclear powers have to think on multiple levels. Right? So you do testing, you do strategic signaling, you do hotlines, you prepare for the worst, you do the entire range of things. You do arms control on the one side, you sort of build up your capabilities on the other side. So all of this goes together. The point is about the strategic signaling that you end up, the messaging that you end up giving. Right.
Right.
So that messaging probably
Correct.
is has gone wrong with this particular sort of set of announcements that Trump has made. In the sense,
Okay.
we were discussing this during the during the Wi-Fi break. I was saying
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
existing nuclear order is what the US sort of led. Now it's by saying on an equal basis, if you test, I will also test. If you do this, I will also do this sort of thing. This reciprocity, this transactional way of looking at things. What the US is doing is stepping back from that leadership and allowing other countries to take the initiative. So somebody can actually test, and then the US, instead of saying no, you can't test, now is saying no, no, okay, so you tested, so I will also test. So that has become the US position, which is a very strange
Yes.
kind of position for.
It's looking at everything from the wrong side. It's looking at everything from the wrong side, wrong point of view. Yeah. Any concluding remarks, Admiral, before we close?
Are we witnessing the end of American exceptionalism? After all, we did make a mention of the number of treaties that have not been ratified by the Congress. It includes the UN clause. But are we now witnessing the moment you say that I'm going to, do things one equal, what you do, I'll do.
Yeah,
The tit for
yeah.
tat situation. You've lost that high seat of exceptionalism, and America will have to come down to the level of the other players. The other players is not just China. There are many other players which will play this game equally deftly, if not as well as the Americans had done. And that again is in inverted commas, can do it just as well. And therefore, once again, it's a inflection point in this entire
Mm.
business of America as an empire that ruled the roost, that created orders, regimens, and so on and so forth. I think we're seeing the beginning of the end, or even maybe halfway through the end, or maybe the end.
That's very well put. So the doomsday clock is ticking, and the US has set the ball rolling on this. So whether Donald Trump is pushing the world dangerously close to nuclear extinction is the big question. Raghotham, you wanted to add something? I've run out of time completely.
So since we are talking about doomsday
Tell
and
me.
all these, I'll tie up a few loose ends and leave you on a positive note. Probably, we will still survive. Despite all the nuclear saber
Fine.
rattling, we will still survive. The reason I'm saying this is, uh, you know, uh, leaving aside what Bharath was saying on who is in control in the US sort of issue. And what the Admiral was saying about the rationality of irrationality in nuclear strategy. Despite that, the fact is that when countries are thinking rationally, which is most of the time that they do, um, nuclear weapons have been used only once, and that was the first time in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. After that, it has never nuclear weapons have never been used. The US did not use it in Korea. The US did not use it in Vietnam. The US did not use it in Afghanistan.
Or in
Soviet Union did not
Afghanistan.
use it. Yeah, Afghanistan and Iraq. Soviet Union did not use it in Afghanistan. These were all wars that the superpowers with thousands of warheads lost. China did not use nuclear weapons against Vietnam in 1979. It was a war that China lost, right? So there is
And it
this,
lost it,
so
yes.
the superpowers, even the superpowers, have chosen to lose wars, strike deals, strike ceasefires, come up with peace negotiations rather than use nuclear weapons. So that is the positive side of this, whole thing. That the whole world and most people see nuclear weapons as weapons that cannot be used at all, which is actually India's position. Right? These are not weapons of war. That is our position. Right? That has always been our position, even when we built those weapons. There is this. There is this. There is not only the deterrence value of nuclear weapons. There is also this taboo. There is also this tradition of non-use that we can actually rely on in terms of nuclear weapons. One of the things that that is a loose end in our discussion was about the Indian position that you were asking about, following the Henry Hyde Act, right? In the India-US nuclear deal. I was sort of, I watched that very closely. I was sort of peripherally involved also in that. So let me just complete that thought for you. The Henry Hyde Act had this clause saying, India cannot test, and if it tests, all cooperation is off. Between the Henry Hyde Act and the 123 agreement, a lot of us protested that you cannot have a no further testing clause in a bilateral agreement. India has a voluntary moratorium, and it's its own moratorium, and it's its business. It's a voluntary thing. We cannot have that in a bilateral agreement. So when the 123 agreement finally was, sort of negotiated, India and the US had the sagacity to sort of smooth over this thing. And the 123 agreement says if India does test, there will be a period of a year of consultations as to how to move forward. All nuclear cooperation won't be taken away at that particular moment. It won't be sort of back to the 1974 sort of situation. We will have a period of 1 year of diplomacy wherein India and the US will sort of try to find a common ground and work together and continue the cooperation sort of thing. So there is this
So
sort of fuzzy element that was
basically, if we
introduced
can,
into the agreement. Yeah. So this
yeah.
fuzzy
So
element was
basically,
introduced
I
into the
don't think
agreement.
India is going to go down that path.
Not if it
It's not
if
going
it
to
is not forced
follow
to.
Moscow's
We are not going
cruise
to be the
missile
first. We are not going to be the first.
delivering a warhead. Yeah,
Yeah, we are not going to be the first either in
exactly.
resuming
So
testing,
basically,
either in resuming testing or
the
nuclear
point
use.
I'm making, the point the point I wanted to make then, basically, in conclusion, is to say that India is probably not going to follow the path that Moscow has taken by, where it's released this cruise missile and it delivered a warhead, and a nuke capable ICBM. That is not what India is all about. But at the same
Right.
time, Donald Trump seems to have raised this bogey of the
Mm.
world dangerously moving closer ever to nuclear
Yes.
extinction. So thank
Yes.
you very
Yes.
much, Vice Admiral Vijay Shankar, for your valuable insights. Thank you, Bharath Gopalaswamy, for answering all our questions, and thank you, Raghotham, for giving us the lowdown on the Hyde Act. That was very interesting. Thank you, viewers. Do click on the New Indian Express website and click and share Global Express.